The bell above the diner door rang just as Maria Lopez slammed the register drawer shut, her hands shaking from a fight she could not afford to lose. Her manager, a heavy-set man named Gary, stood behind her with his arms crossed, his voice low and sharp. "Your hours are cut. Starting Monday, you work 3 days instead of 5. I don't have a choice, Maria. Business is slow." Maria's stomach dropped. 3 days a week would not cover her rent. It would not cover anything. She had 2 children waiting for her at her sister's apartment, and a landlord who had already sent 1 warning letter. She opened her mouth to argue, but Gary walked away before she could speak, disappearing into the back office and closing the door behind him. She stood there for a moment, gripping the edge of the counter, trying to breathe. The diner was nearly empty. Only one booth by the window held a customer, an old truck driver finishing his coffee. The clock above the kitchen window read 11:30 at night. Her shift ended in 30 minutes, and she still had to walk 2 miles home because she could not afford the bus fare this week. She wiped down the counter with a rag, forcing her hands to stay busy so her mind would not spiral into panic. She thought about her daughter's worn-out shoes, about the eviction notice taped to her door just 2 days earlier, about the way her son had asked if they were moving again. She had told him no. She had promised him no. But standing in that empty diner, she was no longer sure she could keep that promise. The door opened again, and cold night air rushed in. Maria looked up out of habit, ready to greet a customer with a tired smile. An old man stepped inside, moving slowly, his coat torn at the shoulder and stained with dirt. His shoes did not match. One was a boot, the other a sneaker with the sole peeling away. His beard was long and gray, tangled from wind and neglect. He stood just inside the doorway, unsure if he was allowed to be there. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I don't have money. I just wanted to sit somewhere warm for a few minutes, if that's all right." Maria glanced toward the office door. Gary would throw him out immediately if he saw him. She had seen it happen before, to other people who wandered in from the cold with empty pockets. She made a quick decision. "Come sit down," she said, motioning to the booth farthest from the office. "It's fine." The old man hesitated, then nodded and shuffled toward the booth, lowering himself carefully into the seat, as if his knees ached with every movement. Maria followed him with a glass of water, setting it down gently in front of him. "Thank you," he said, his voice rough but polite. "You didn't have to do that." "It's just water," she said, though she knew it was more than that. It was permission to exist somewhere safe, even for a short while. She returned to the counter and tried to focus on her closing tasks, refilling napkin holders and wiping down the pie case. But her eyes kept drifting back to him. He sat with his hands folded on the table, staring out the window at the empty street, his shoulders hunched against a cold that the diner's heater could not fully chase away. She thought about her own children, about how frightened they would be if they ever ended up like this man, alone and forgotten by the world. She reached into her apron pocket, where she kept her tip money for the night. She counted it quickly. $3. That was all she had earned in tips during her entire shift, and it was all the cash she had left until her next paycheck, which would not even be enough to cover what she owed. She looked at the old man again. He had not asked for anything. He had only asked to sit somewhere warm. Maria walked to the counter, took a sandwich from the display case, the same turkey sandwich she had planned to eat herself before her shift ended, and poured a fresh cup of coffee. She carried both to his table and set them down in front of him. "I can't accept this," he said, shaking his head. "I told you, I don't have money." "I know," Maria said. "It's on me. Please eat." He looked up at her, his eyes tired but sharp, studying her face, as if trying to understand why a stranger would do such a thing. "You don't even know me," he said. "I don't need to know you to see that you're hungry," Maria answered. "Eat before it gets cold." For a moment, something flickered across his face, an expression Maria could not quite read. It was not simple gratitude. It looked closer to disbelief, as if kindness itself had surprised him more than the food. He ate slowly, savoring each bite as though he had not eaten a real meal in days. Maria returned to her work, giving him privacy, but she could feel him watching her occasionally, his eyes following her movements around the diner. When he finished, he wiped his mouth with the napkin and folded his hands again. "What's your name?" he asked. "Maria." "Maria, he repeated, as if committing it to memory. Thank you, Maria. You have no idea what this means. It's just a sandwich, she said, though her voice cracked slightly. She was thinking of her own hunger, of the meal she had just given away, of the bills piling up at home. She forced a smile instead. Everyone needs a little help sometimes. Not everyone gives it, the old man said quietly. The old truck driver in the other booth finished his coffee and left a few crumpled bills on the table before walking out into the night. The diner grew even quieter, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound besides the old man's slow breathing. May I ask your name? Maria said, curious despite herself. He paused, as if deciding whether to answer honestly. Daniel, he finally said. Well, Daniel, I hope you find somewhere warm to stay tonight. He nodded slowly, his eyes drifting toward the window again. I will find something, he said. I always do. Maria began stacking chairs onto tables, signaling that closing time was near. Daniel understood and rose from the booth, moving carefully, his joints stiff from the cold. He walked toward the door, then paused and turned back to look at her. You gave me the last of what you had, he said. I could see it in your eyes. You didn't have much to give, and you gave it anyway. Maria felt her cheeks flush. She had not expected him to notice, or to say something so direct. It wasn't much, she said, just a sandwich and some coffee. It was everything, Daniel said. There's a difference between charity from someone who has plenty and charity from someone who has nearly nothing. What you did tonight, Maria, matters more than you know. Before she could respond, he pushed open the door and stepped out into the cold night, disappearing down the empty street. Maria stood by the window for a long moment, watching his shadow grow smaller under the streetlights, until he turned a corner and vanished from sight. She finished closing the diner alone, locking the front door and turning off the lights. As she walked home through the quiet streets, her thoughts kept returning to Daniel's words. There's a difference between charity from someone who has plenty and charity from someone who has nearly nothing. It was a strange thing for a homeless man to say, phrased almost like something rehearsed, something he had thought about deeply before saying it aloud. She pushed the thought aside, too exhausted to dwell on it further. When she reached her sister's apartment, she let herself in quietly, so she would not wake anyone. Her son was asleep on the couch, his small body curled beneath a thin blanket. Her daughter slept in the back bedroom with her aunt. Maria sat down at the kitchen table and stared at the eviction notice still taped where she had left it, a reminder of everything she could not fix. She thought about the $3 she no longer had, about the sandwich she had given away, about the strange sense of peace that had settled over her despite her worsening circumstances. She did not regret it. Somehow, giving Daniel that meal had felt like the only right decision she had made all week, even though it made her situation harder. She closed her eyes and rested her head on her arms at the table, too tired to move to a bed. Sleep came quickly, filled with vague dreams of warm diners and quiet strangers. The next morning, she woke to the sound of her children getting ready for school. She made them a simple breakfast from what little food remained in the refrigerator, forcing a cheerful tone into her voice so they would not sense her worry. After they left for school with her sister, Maria allowed herself a moment of stillness, staring at the eviction notice again, calculating numbers in her head that never seemed to add up, no matter how many times she tried. She thought about Daniel again, wondering where he had slept, whether he had found somewhere warm. She hoped, in a distant way, that he had found a shelter or a kind soul willing to offer him a bed for the night. She told herself she would probably never see him again, that strangers who passed through diners rarely returned, and that the encounter had simply been one small moment of connection in an otherwise difficult week. She had no way of knowing that her act of kindness had already set something in motion, something far beyond her small diner and her small town, something that would return to her life within days, in a way she could never have imagined. That evening, Maria returned to the diner for her shift, her body heavy with exhaustion, but her mind oddly calm. Gary barely acknowledged her as she clocked in, still upset about their earlier conversation regarding her hours. She tied her apron around her waist and began her usual routine, refilling ketchup bottles, wiping down tables, greeting customers with the same tired smile she always wore. Throughout the night, She found herself glancing toward the door every time the bell rang, half expecting to see Daniel walk in again. He never did. By the time her shift ended, she told herself it did not matter. She had helped a stranger in need, and that was enough. She did not need anything in return. But as she walked home that night, the streets felt different somehow, as if unseen eyes were watching from the shadows, as if something significant lingered just beyond her awareness. She quickened her pace, telling herself it was only exhaustion playing tricks on her mind. She had no idea that two men in a parked car near the diner had watched her leave that night, taking notes, making a phone call to someone in a distant city who listened carefully to every detail they provided about the young waitress who had given her last $3 to a stranger, without asking a single question about who he was. Maria walked home alone, unaware that her life was about to change in ways she could never have predicted, all because of one small act of kindness, offered freely on an ordinary, difficult night. A loud knock on the apartment door jolted Maria awake before her alarm even rang. She sat up on the couch, heart pounding, and checked the clock. It was barely 6 in the morning. She opened the door carefully, expecting a neighbor or a delivery, but instead found the landlord standing there with a folder in his hand and an unreadable expression on his face. "You have until the end of the week," he said flatly. "If the rent isn't paid, I start the eviction process. I'm sorry, Maria, but I have my own bills too." He left without waiting for a response, his footsteps echoing down the hallway. Maria closed the door and leaned her back against it, sliding down until she sat on the floor, her knees pulled to her chest. She had known this moment was coming, but hearing it spoken aloud made it feel unbearably real. Her sister emerged from the bedroom, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "Was that him again?" Maria nodded, unable to speak for a moment. Her sister sat down beside her on the floor, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "We'll figure something out," her sister said, though her voice lacked conviction. She had her own struggles, her own children to feed, and Maria knew she could not lean on her much longer without pulling her down as well. "I gave away my last $3 last night," Maria admitted quietly, "to a homeless man. I don't even know why I did it. I just felt like I had to." Her sister studied her for a moment, then squeezed her shoulder gently. "That doesn't sound like something to regret. It sounds like something to be proud of." Maria managed a small, tired smile. "Try telling that to the landlord." They both laughed softly, a brief release of tension in an otherwise heavy morning. Maria got up, dressed for the day, and helped her children get ready for school, pushing her worries aside as best she could for their sake. Meanwhile, across town, in a quiet motel room paid for in cash, Daniel sat at a small table with an old telephone in his hand. His posture was different now, straighter, more composed, though his clothes remained the same worn coat and mismatched shoes from the night before. He dialed a number he clearly knew by memory and waited. "It's me," he said when the call connected. His voice had changed too, carrying a calm authority that had not been present in the diner. "I found someone. Her name is Maria Lopez. She works at a diner on Main Street. Pull everything you can on her situation, quietly. I want to know everything by tomorrow morning." He listened for a moment to the voice on the other end, then nodded, even though no one could see him. "Yes, I'm certain." She gave away the only money she had left without hesitation, without asking who I was or what I could offer her. That kind of thing is rare. I've been searching for months, and I believe I finally found it. He ended the call and sat quietly for a long moment, staring at his reflection in the dark motel window. His eyes, though tired from the physical toll of his disguise, held a sharp clarity that did not match the appearance of a homeless wanderer. He reached into a hidden pocket sewn into the lining of his coat and pulled out a small photograph, worn at the edges from years of handling. It showed a younger version of himself standing beside a woman and a young boy, all three of them smiling in front of a modest house. He looked at it for a long moment before carefully returning it to its hiding place. Outside the motel, unnoticed by anyone in the small town, 2 black sedans idled near the corner, their drivers waiting patiently for further instructions. That afternoon, as Maria prepared for her shift, strange things began happening that she could not immediately explain. A well-dressed man she did not recognize walked past the diner twice, glancing through the window each time as if searching for someone. When she stepped outside briefly to take out the trash, she noticed a car parked across the street that had not been there the day before, its windows tinted so dark she could not see who sat inside. She told herself it was nothing, simple coincidence in a town where nothing unusual ever happened. But a nagging unease settled in her chest regardless, the kind of feeling she could not shake no matter how she tried to distract herself with work. Her shift that night felt longer than usual. The diner was busier than the previous evening, filled with truck drivers and late-night travelers passing through on the highway. Maria moved from table to table, taking orders, refilling drinks, forcing cheerful energy into every interaction despite her exhaustion. Yet throughout the night, she found her eyes drifting toward the door each time it opened, half hoping, half fearing that Daniel might return. He did not come. By the time her shift ended, disappointment settled over her. Though she could not fully explain why, she barely knew the man. He had been a stranger passing through her life for less than an hour. Yet something about their brief conversation had lingered in her mind all day, refusing to fade. As she walked home, she noticed the same dark car from earlier parked near the corner of her street, its engine running quietly, exhaust curling into the cold night air. She slowed her pace, uncertain whether to feel afraid or simply curious. The car did not move. No one stepped out. After a long moment, she continued walking, glancing back once before turning onto her street, but the car remained still, its occupants invisible behind tinted glass. Inside the apartment, her sister waited up for her, worry etched across her face. "Someone came by asking about you today," she said, as soon as Maria stepped through the door. Maria's stomach tightened. "What do you mean, asking about me?" "A man in a suit. He said he was doing research for some kind of community program, asking about your work history, how long you'd lived here, things like that. I didn't tell him much. It felt strange, so I sent him away." Maria sat down heavily at the kitchen table, her mind racing through possibilities. Debt collectors did not usually dress well or ask polite questions about community programs. This felt different, more deliberate, though she could not begin to guess why anyone would take interest in her ordinary, struggling life. "Did he give a name?" she asked. Her sister shook her head. "No, just said he'd be in touch." "Maria, what's going on?" "I don't know," Maria admitted honestly. "I really don't know." She thought again of Daniel, of the strange intensity in his eyes when he had thanked her, of his oddly formal way of speaking despite his ragged appearance. A small, unlikely thought crossed her mind, quickly dismissed as foolish. There was no way a homeless man wandering into a diner could be connected to strangers in suits and unmarked cars watching her apartment. It made no logical sense. Still, sleep did not come easily that night. She lay awake on the couch, staring at the ceiling, replaying every detail of her encounter with Daniel, searching for some clue she might have missed. She remembered his hands, weathered but not calloused in the way a lifetime of hard labor would leave them. She remembered the careful way he had folded his napkin, a small, precise gesture that seemed out of place for someone living on the streets. She remembered his eyes most of all, sharp and alert despite his exhaustion, watching her with an intensity that suggested he was studying her as much as she had been studying him. The next morning brought no relief. The eviction notice remained taped to a nearby wall, its deadline drawing closer with each passing hour. Maria went through her morning routine mechanically, her mind elsewhere, distracted by unanswered questions that refused to quiet themselves. At the diner that afternoon, her coworker, a friendly young woman named Grace, pulled her aside during a lull in customers. "Maria, have you noticed people asking about you around town? My cousin works at the gas station, and she said some man came in yesterday, asking if anyone knew a waitress who worked nights at this diner. Described you pretty specifically." Maria's unease deepened. "What did he look like?" "Well dressed," my cousin said. "Not from around here. Spoke real formal, like someone important." Grace studied Maria's face carefully. "Are you in some kind of trouble?" "I don't think so," Maria said slowly, though her voice lacked confidence. "I really don't know what's happening." Grace leaned closer, lowering her voice. "You didn't do anything wrong, did you? This isn't about money you owe someone, is it?" Maria shook her head firmly. "No, nothing like that. I promise." Though even as she said it, Doubt lingered in the back of her mind. She thought once more of the $3 she had given away, of the strange conviction in Daniel's eyes, of his cryptic words about the difference between charity from someone who has plenty and someone who has nearly nothing. Could a simple act of kindness truly attract this much unusual attention? It seemed impossible, yet the timing felt too precise to be mere coincidence. The rest of her shift passed in a blur of forced smiles and distracted service. By the time she finished for the night, exhaustion weighed on her more heavily than usual, not from physical labor alone, but from the mental strain of unanswered questions circling endlessly through her thoughts. As she left the diner, she paused beneath the streetlight outside, staring down the empty road where the mysterious dark car had waited the previous night. Tonight, the street remained empty, no watching vehicles, no lingering shadows. Yet the unease did not fade. If anything, its absence felt more unsettling than its presence had been, as though whatever force had been observing her had simply moved to a different vantage point, patient and unseen. She began her walk home, glancing over her shoulder more than once, unable to shake the sensation that she was being watched from somewhere just beyond her sight. She did not know that within the modest office of a private investigator, 2 towns away, a thick file was already being compiled about her life, her financial struggles, her unwavering dedication to her children, and the small, selfless act of kindness that had brought her, without her knowledge, to the attention of someone with the power to change everything. By the 3rd morning, the small town had begun to talk. Word spread quickly in a place where little ever happened, and the sudden appearance of well-dressed strangers asking careful questions about a struggling diner waitress became the topic of hushed conversations at the grocery store, the gas station, and the church down the street. Maria felt the shift the moment she stepped outside her apartment, the way neighbors glanced at her a beat too long before offering their usual polite greetings. At the diner, Gary called her into his cramped office before her shift began, closing the door behind her with unusual caution. "Someone called here this morning," he said, folding his hands on his desk. "Asked a lot of questions about you, your schedule, how long you've worked here, if you're reliable. Wanted to know if I'd vouch for your character." Maria's chest tightened. "What did you tell him?" "I told him you're the hardest working person I've got," Gary said, his usual gruffness softened slightly. "Even after I cut your hours, you never complained. Just kept showing up, kept doing your job right." He paused, studying her carefully. "Maria, are you in some kind of trouble? Because if someone's after you, I need to know. This is my business." "I don't know what's happening," Maria said honestly, her voice trembling slightly. "I swear, Gary, I haven't done anything wrong." Gary studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly, seeming to accept her sincerity. "All right, just be careful. Whoever's asking around, they're not local. That much I could tell." He waved her back toward the floor, and Maria left his office with her mind spinning faster than ever. Throughout her shift, Grace kept glancing at her with a mixture of curiosity and concern, occasionally whispering updates she had gathered from other coworkers about the strange man who had been asking questions throughout town. Some said he had visited the church, inquiring about Maria's character and her standing in the community. Others claimed he had spoken with her landlord, though the landlord himself denied any such conversation had taken place, adding another layer of confusion to an already bewildering situation. Maria tried to focus on her work, refilling coffee cups and taking orders, but her hands trembled slightly with each task, betraying the anxiety building steadily beneath her calm exterior. She thought constantly about Daniel, replaying their conversation over and over, searching for any detail that might explain the strange events unfolding around her. Nothing made sense. A homeless man she had fed out of simple compassion could not possibly be connected to wealthy-looking strangers investigating her life so thoroughly. Yet the timing remained too precise to dismiss entirely. During a brief lull in customers, she stepped outside for a moment of fresh air, leaning against the brick wall beside the diner's back entrance. The evening air was cool, carrying the faint smell of rain approaching from the west. She closed her eyes, trying to steady her racing thoughts, when the sound of careful footsteps approaching made her open them again. A man stood a respectful distance away, dressed in an expensive dark suit that looked entirely out of place against the modest backdrop of the diner and the quiet residential street beyond it. He was tall, with silver hair neatly combed, and an air of quiet authority in his posture. He held a black folder under one arm and regarded her with calm, measuring eyes. "Miss Lopez," he said, his voice smooth and formal. "My name is Mr. Whitfield. I apologize for the questions circulating around town. I understand it must be unsettling." Maria straightened, her guard rising instinctively. "Who are you? Why are you asking about me?" "I represent someone who wishes to remain unnamed for the moment," Whitfield said carefully. "But I assure you, you are not in any trouble. Quite the opposite, in fact." "That doesn't answer my question," Maria said, her voice firmer than she felt inside. Whitfield offered a small, patient smile. "You served a meal to a man 3 nights ago. An older gentleman, dressed poorly, who came into this diner asking only to sit somewhere warm. Do you remember him?" Maria's breath caught. "Daniel," she said quietly. "Yes," Whitfield confirmed. "The person I represent was deeply moved by what you did that night. He would like to meet with you personally, to thank you properly for your kindness." Maria studied him carefully, searching his face for any sign of deception. "This doesn't make sense. Why would anyone go through all this trouble over a sandwich and a cup of coffee?" "Sometimes," Whitfield said, "the smallest gestures carry the greatest weight, especially to those who rarely receive genuine kindness without expectation of something in return." He opened the folder he carried and produced a plain white card, extending it toward her. "There is an address here. Tomorrow afternoon, if you're willing, a car will come to bring you there. You may decline, of course. No one will force you to attend." Maria took the card hesitantly, turning it over in her hands. It contained only an address in a part of the city she had never visited, along with a time, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and nothing else. No name, no explanation, nothing to indicate what awaited her there. "I don't understand any of this," she admitted, her voice small. "You don't need to understand it yet," Whitfield said gently. "You simply need to decide whether you're willing to find out." He gave a slight bow of his head. "I hope to see you tomorrow, Miss Lopez. And please, do not worry. Whatever uncertainty you're feeling now, I promise you it will be resolved soon, in a way I believe will bring you great relief." He turned and walked away before she could ask any further questions, moving toward a black sedan parked at the curb, the same type of vehicle she had noticed watching her apartment 2 nights earlier. The car pulled away smoothly, disappearing around the corner, leaving Maria standing alone in the cool evening air, the white card trembling slightly in her grip. She returned inside the diner in a daze, barely registering Grace's concerned questions about who she had been speaking with outside. She managed only a distracted response before retreating to finish her shift, her mind consumed entirely by the strange card in her apron pocket and the impossible promise it represented. That night, she showed the card to her sister, who studied it with wide, worried eyes. "Maria, you can't just go to some address a stranger gave you. This could be dangerous. This could be anything." "I know how it looks," Maria said, though her own uncertainty was evident in her voice. "But something about this feels connected to Daniel, the man from the diner. I don't think anyone means to hurt me." "You don't know that," her sister argued. "You met a homeless man for 10 minutes, and now strangers are following you, asking about your life, showing up with mysterious invitations. This is exactly the kind of thing you're supposed to walk away from." Maria understood her sister's fear, and part of her agreed with the caution in her words. Yet another part of her, the same part that had compelled her to give away her last $3 without hesitation, told her that walking away now would mean forever wondering about the truth behind everything that had happened. She thought of the eviction notice still waiting for her, of the impossible math of her finances that never seemed to balance no matter how hard she worked. She thought of Daniel's eyes, sharp and knowing, and his strange, formal words that had felt rehearsed even in his ragged disguise. "I need to know," she finally said. "I need to understand what's happening. I'll be careful. I'll tell you exactly where I'm going, and if I don't check in by a certain time, you call the police. But I have to go, Anna. I can't spend the rest of my life wondering." Her sister studied her for a long moment, then reluctantly nodded, though worry remained etched deeply across her face. "All right, but you check in every hour. I mean it, Maria." Maria agreed, though sleep proved elusive once again that night. She lay awake on the couch, staring at the small white card resting on the coffee table beside her, its simple black text seeming to hold the answer to every question that had consumed her for the past 3 days. Whatever waited for her at that address tomorrow afternoon, she knew her life was about to change in ways she could not yet imagine, for better or for worse, and there was no way to know which until she walked through that door herself. The following morning passed in a haze of nervous anticipation. Maria went through the motions of preparing her children for school, forcing calm into her voice despite the storm of uncertainty churning inside her. After they left, she dressed carefully in her best clothes, a simple blouse and skirt she had saved for important occasions, though she owned little else to choose from. She studied her reflection in the cracked bathroom mirror, wondering what kind of person waited for her at the end of this strange journey, and whether she was making a terrible mistake by seeking answers instead of simply letting the mystery fade away. At exactly 2 o'clock, as promised, a black car pulled up outside her sister's apartment building. Maria took a deep breath, kissed her children's photograph for luck, and walked outside to meet whatever awaited her, carrying with her the small, unshakable hope that somehow, impossibly, kindness truly did have a way of returning to those who gave it freely. The car ride felt longer than the actual distance warranted, winding through unfamiliar streets that grew progressively cleaner and more polished the farther they traveled from her own neighborhood. Maria sat rigidly in the back seat, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, watching the scenery shift from cracked sidewalks and faded storefronts to manicured lawns and buildings made of glass and steel. The driver said little during the journey, offering only brief, polite responses when she attempted conversation, until eventually she gave up trying and simply watched the world change outside her window. They arrived at a modest-looking office building, tucked between larger corporate towers, its exterior understated compared to its glamorous neighbors, almost deliberately so. Whitfield waited by the entrance, offering a reassuring smile as Maria stepped out of the car, her legs unsteady beneath her. "Thank you for coming," he said warmly. "Please, follow me." He led her through a quiet lobby and into an elevator that rose smoothly toward the upper floors. Maria's heart pounded with each passing second, uncertainty and anticipation battling within her chest. When the elevator doors finally opened, she found herself in a hallway lined with simple, elegant artwork, leading toward a set of double doors at its end. Whitfield opened the doors and gestured for her to enter. Maria stepped inside cautiously, finding herself in a spacious office with large windows overlooking the city skyline. Behind a wide desk stood a man dressed in a tailored suit, his silver hair neatly combed, his posture confident and composed. It took Maria several seconds of confused study before recognition finally struck her, and her breath caught sharply in her throat. It was Daniel, the same weathered face, though cleaned and groomed now, the same sharp, knowing eyes that had studied her so carefully in the diner 3 nights earlier. But everything else about him had transformed entirely, from his ragged, mismatched clothing into an expensive suit that fit him perfectly, from his hunched, exhausted posture into the confident bearing of someone accustomed to commanding respect. "Hello, Maria," he said gently, his voice carrying the same warmth she remembered, though clearer now, more certain. "Daniel?" Maria whispered, disbelief washing over her in waves. "I don't understand. What is this? Who are you?" "Please, sit down," he said, motioning toward a chair across from his desk. "I owe you an explanation, and I intend to give you the full truth." Maria lowered herself into the chair slowly, her mind struggling to reconcile the ragged stranger from the diner with the composed, powerful figure standing before her now. Whitfield quietly excused himself, closing the office doors behind him and leaving the two of them alone. "My name is Daniel Whitmore," he began, watching her carefully as he spoke. "I own a foundation that supports various charitable causes throughout the country. What you don't know, what almost no one knows, is that several times a year, I dress as you saw me and go out into different towns, searching for something specific." "Searching for what?" Maria asked, still struggling to absorb the enormity of what she was hearing. "Genuine kindness," Daniel said simply. "Real compassion, offered without any expectation of reward, without knowing whether the person receiving it deserves it or can offer anything in return. It's become increasingly rare to find, Maria. Most people who help strangers do so cautiously, calculating the risk, wondering what might be asked of them later. You didn't hesitate. You gave me the last of what you had without a single question about who I was or what I could offer you. Maria felt tears threatening at the corners of her eyes, overwhelmed by the weight of his words and the impossible situation she found herself in. I just saw someone who needed help, she said quietly. That's all it was. I didn't think it meant anything special. That's precisely why it meant so much, Daniel said, his voice softening further. Years ago, I lost my wife and my son in an accident that nearly destroyed me. In the months that followed, I wandered through some very dark places, both literally and within myself. During that time, I experienced true poverty, true hunger, and I learned firsthand how rarely people extend genuine kindness to those who appear to have nothing to offer in return. When I eventually rebuilt my life and my fortune, I promised myself I would search for people like you, people whose compassion remained untouched by cynicism or calculation, and I would find ways to change their lives the way strangers occasionally changed mine during my darkest moments. Maria sat in stunned silence, absorbing the depth of his story, the pain evident beneath his composed exterior despite the years that had passed since his loss. I'm so sorry for what happened to your family, she said softly. Thank you, Daniel replied, his eyes distant for a moment, before refocusing on her. But this isn't about my grief anymore. It's about recognizing goodness where it truly exists, and ensuring it doesn't go unnoticed or unrewarded. Maria, I've had my team investigate your situation over the past 3 days. I know about the eviction notice. I know your hours were cut at the diner. I know how hard you worked to provide for your children despite circumstances that would break most people. Maria felt embarrassment mixing with her disbelief, uncomfortable knowing how thoroughly her private struggles had been examined by strangers. You had people watching me? I apologize for the intrusion, Daniel said sincerely. It was necessary to understand your full situation before I could determine how best to help you. I promise you, the investigation was conducted respectfully, and everything learned remains strictly confidential. Help me how? Maria asked, still uncertain what any of this meant for her practically. Daniel leaned forward slightly, his expression earnest. I want to change your life, Maria, in ways that reflect the enormity of what your small act of kindness meant to me. But before I explain the details, I need you to understand something important. This isn't charity offered out of pity. This is genuine gratitude, and an investment in someone whose character I deeply admire. Maria's hands trembled in her lap, overwhelmed by emotions she could not fully name. Disbelief and hope and fear all tangled together. I don't know what to say, she whispered. You don't need to say anything yet, Daniel said gently. Just listen, and let me explain everything I have in mind. Tomorrow, we'll discuss the details fully. Today, I simply wanted you to understand who I truly am, and why what you did meant more to me than you could have possibly imagined. He rose from his desk and walked toward the window, gazing out over the city skyline with a contemplative expression. Do you know, Maria, in all the months I've spent doing this, wandering through different towns, testing the kindness of strangers, you're only the third person who has passed what I consider the true test of character. Most people, when they see someone in need, they hesitate, they calculate. They wonder if helping might cost them too much, or if the person deserves their help at all. You didn't hesitate for even a moment. I couldn't just watch you sit there hungry, Maria said simply. It didn't feel like a choice. Daniel turned back to face her, a warm smile spreading across his face. That's exactly why you're here today. That instinct, that immediate, unquestioning compassion, is precisely what I've been searching for. It's rare, Maria, rarer than you might think. He returned to his desk and pressed a small button, and moments later, Whitfield re-entered the office, carrying a fresh folder. Please arrange for Miss Lopez to return tomorrow morning, Daniel instructed. We have much to discuss, and I want to ensure everything is prepared properly. Whitfield nodded and turned toward Maria. A car will collect you at 10 o'clock, if that suits you. Maria nodded numbly, still struggling to process the whirlwind of revelations that had unfolded over the past hour. Daniel walked around his desk and extended his hand toward her, his expression sincere and warm. Thank you again, Maria, for what you did 3 nights ago. I promise you, Tomorrow will bring answers to every question you still have, and I believe, changes that will bring you and your children genuine relief and security. Maria shook his hand, still overwhelmed, still uncertain whether she was dreaming or truly living through this impossible turn of events. Thank you, Daniel. Or should I call you something else now? Daniel is fine, he said with a gentle laugh, the first genuine lightness she had seen from him since arriving. It's still my name, regardless of the suit. Whitfield escorted her back down to the waiting car, and Maria rode home in stunned silence, staring out the window at the city passing by without truly seeing it. Her mind raced through everything Daniel had told her, the loss he had endured, the purpose behind his strange test, the promise of help that awaited her the following day. She thought of her children, of the eviction notice, of the impossible financial pressure that had weighed on her for months, and allowed herself, cautiously, to hope that perhaps her circumstances were truly about to change. When she arrived home, her sister bombarded her with questions, and Maria did her best to explain everything she had learned, watching her sister's expression shift from worry to disbelief to cautious hope as the story unfolded. That night, for the first time in weeks, Maria slept soundly, her dreams filled not with anxiety over unpaid bills, but with quiet, uncertain hope for whatever awaited her the next morning. The next morning arrived with a strange calm that Maria had not felt in months. She dressed carefully once again, her nerves steadier than the day before, though anticipation still fluttered in her chest as she waited for the car to arrive. Her sister hugged her tightly before she left, whispering that whatever happened, she was proud of the woman Maria had become, despite every hardship life had thrown at her. The drive to Daniel's office felt shorter this time, familiar streets passing by more quickly now that the initial shock had faded into cautious anticipation. When she arrived, Whitfield greeted her warmly at the entrance, leading her once again through the quiet lobby and up to the top-floor office where Daniel waited. He rose from his desk as she entered, his expression bright with genuine warmth. "Maria, thank you for coming back. Please, sit down. Today, we finalize everything." Maria settled into the chair across from his desk, her hands steadier now than they had been the previous day, though her heart still pounded with uncertain anticipation. "I've thought about everything you told me," she said. "I still can't quite believe it's real." "It's very real," Daniel assured her, sliding a folder across the desk toward her. "This contains the details of what I'd like to offer you, though please understand, nothing here is conditional. You may accept all of it, some of it, or none of it. The choice is entirely yours." Maria opened the folder with trembling hands, scanning the documents inside. Her eyes widened as she processed the information laid out before her in clear, official language. The first document confirmed that her outstanding debts, including the overdue rent that had triggered her eviction notice, had already been paid in full. The second outlined a trust fund established for her children's education, ensuring their schooling through college, regardless of future circumstances. The third document offered her a position within Daniel's foundation, managing community outreach programs, with a salary that far exceeded anything she had ever imagined earning, along with full benefits and stable, predictable hours that would finally allow her to be present for her children in ways her diner job had never permitted. Tears filled Maria's eyes as she read through each page, disbelief and overwhelming gratitude washing over her in powerful waves. "Daniel, this is too much. I can't accept all of this. I only gave you a sandwich." "You gave me far more than a sandwich, Maria," Daniel said gently, leaning forward with sincere warmth in his eyes. "You gave me proof that genuine kindness still exists in this world, offered without calculation, without hesitation, without any thought of what might be gained in return. That gift, to someone who has spent years searching for it, is worth more than any amount of money I could offer you." Maria wiped tears from her cheeks, still struggling to fully accept the reality of what was happening. "I don't know how to thank you properly for this." "You already have," Daniel said simply. 3 nights ago, in a diner, when you had every reason to keep what little you had for yourself, and chose instead to share it with a stranger who appeared to have nothing to offer you." He paused, his expression growing more reflective. "After I lost my wife and son, I wandered for months, broken and lost, wondering if the world still held any real goodness. I encountered plenty of people during that time who saw my suffering and turned away, unwilling to risk anything for a stranger who seemed to have nothing left to give them in return. But occasionally, I encountered people like you, and those moments, Maria, those small acts of unconditional kindness, are what eventually helped me find my way back to purpose and meaning. Maria listened intently, understanding now the deeper significance behind everything he had built, the foundation, the strange tests he conducted, the search for genuine compassion in an often calculating world. Your family would be proud of what you're doing, she said softly, turning your pain into something that helps so many people. Daniel's eyes grew misty for a moment before he composed himself, offering her a grateful smile. Thank you, Maria. That means more than you know. He straightened in his seat, returning to a more businesslike tone, though warmth remained evident beneath it. Now, take your time reviewing everything in that folder. There's no pressure, no obligation. Whatever you decide, I hope you understand how deeply grateful I am for what you did. Maria spent the following hour reviewing every document carefully, asking questions that Daniel and Whitfield patiently answered, ensuring she fully understood every aspect of what was being offered to her. By the time she finished, disbelief had slowly transformed into cautious acceptance, and finally into overwhelming gratitude and joy that she could barely contain. I accept, she finally said, her voice steady despite the tears still glistening in her eyes. All of it. Thank you, Daniel. Thank you for seeing something in me that I didn't even realize mattered. Daniel smiled warmly, rising from his desk to shake her hand once again. Thank you for reminding me that it still exists, Maria. People like you are the reason I continue this work, year after year. Over the following weeks, Maria's life transformed in ways she could scarcely have imagined during those difficult nights at the diner. Her children moved into a comfortable new home, no longer facing the threat of eviction or uncertainty about their next meal. She began her new position at Daniel's Foundation, discovering a genuine passion for the outreach work, connecting struggling families throughout the region with resources and support that mirrored the kindness once shown to her by a stranger she had believed to be homeless. She often thought back to that ordinary night at the diner, to the exhaustion and worry that had consumed her before Daniel walked through the door, torn coat and mismatched shoes, disguising a man of extraordinary wealth and purpose. She realized now that her decision to give away her last $3 had not been a moment of foolish sacrifice, but rather the truest expression of who she was as a person, compassion offered freely, without calculation or expectation. Months later, during a quiet visit to Daniel's office to discuss an upcoming outreach program, Maria found herself reflecting on everything that had changed since that fateful night. Do you ever wonder, she asked him, what would have happened if I hadn't given you that sandwich? If I had just let you sit there without offering anything? Daniel considered the question thoughtfully before responding. I've wondered that many times, Maria, but I've come to believe that people who possess genuine kindness rarely fail the test when it matters most. It's woven into who they are, not something they perform when convenient. I don't think you could have walked away from me that night, even if you had tried. Maria smiled, understanding the truth in his words. Her kindness had never been a calculated decision or a performance for anyone watching. It had simply been an instinct, a reflection of her character, offered freely in a moment when she believed no one would ever know or remember what she had done. Yet someone had known. Someone had remembered, and that single act of compassion, offered during one of the hardest weeks of her life, had returned to her, multiplied beyond anything she could have imagined, transforming not only her own future, but the futures of countless families her new work would touch in the years ahead. As she left Daniel's office that afternoon, walking out into the warm sunlight of a city that had once felt so foreign and intimidating, Maria carried with her a simple truth she now understood more deeply than ever before. Kindness, offered without hesitation or expectation, held a power that reached far beyond the moment it was given, rippling outward in ways no one could fully predict, touching lives, changing destinies, and proving, again and again, that even in the darkest, most uncertain moments, genuine compassion always finds its way back to those who give it freely.